Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. In today's video I'm going to be taking a more detailed look at the Openxr toolkit. I've spent some more time further refining my settings, and I feel like I've dialed them in a little bit better now, and it's further improved my VR experience. I've also taken my first stab at producing a through the lens video, just so I can show you what it looks like in the headset itself and to show the performance that I'm getting. Of course, through the lens videos don't really show the image quality as they're very blurry and out of focus, but what I'm hoping it shows is the kind of smoothness that I'm getting using these new toolkit settings. But anyway, we'll talk about that more a bit later on. So first, let's get back into my new settings for the Openxr toolkit app. The settings I showed in my last video for the app were working very well, but it was only after a couple of days of testing, so it was definitely something that's worth experimenting with more, as there's quite a lot of room for adjustment with this app. Also, the creator of the app, Mr. Matthew Bucchianeri, I hope I pronounced that right, so apologies Matthew if I haven't, but he kindly reached out to me with some advice, particularly concerning my Fixed Foveated rendering settings, so I'll be sharing that with you today. The area that I'm flying around at the moment, and the one that I chose specifically for this settings video, is the Italian coastal city of La Spezia. Here's a photo of the actual location. La Spezia is one of the main Italian military and commercial harbors and a major Italian naval base. I'm using the add-on Project Coastline Italy, which contains the port of La Spezia, as well as many other Italian ports and coastal cities. One thing I found in the past, especially with this port, is because of its detail, my system did take quite a performance hit. But now, with the new Fixed Foveated rendering tool that we have, my system is able to handle it much more comfortably. These are the settings from my previous video, and the ones that were working pretty well. However, the toolkit's creator Matthew reached out to me and mentioned that he'd noticed that the inner ring size I had was equal to the outer ring size, which meant effectively I wasn't using the middle ring. His recommendation was that I experiment with a 3-ring setup. To do that, I'd need to reduce the inner ring size and maybe increase the outer ring size. The theory behind all of this is explained very well on the Toolkit website. It's located under the Features tab. And to be honest, I'd actually missed it, so thanks to Matthew for pointing that out again. And if you think you've missed it, and I highly recommend that you go to the website if you haven't seen it and read it as he explains it, probably far better than I can. But I think essentially by missing one of those rings, I wasn't really getting the full benefit of the Fixed Foveated rendering tool. So after quite a bit more experimentation with both the motion reprojection disabled as well as enabled, I came to the following conclusion. These are the final settings I've settled on. As you can see, the only setting I changed was the inner ring size. I've lowered that from 70% to 60%. When I experimented with the outer ring size, I went up to about 80%, and to be honest, I didn't see any marked difference in the performance or the frames per second, and visually, I didn't see really any major benefits that would be worthwhile for this increase. However, when I went below 70% for the outer ring size, say around 65, heading towards 60, I noticed a difference, and that was in the quality, because obviously you see more of that outer ring in your peripheral vision, and it's much more noticeable. So obviously that's not something that I liked, so I settled on 70%. And as you can see, I kept the middle resolution and outer resolution the same as my previous settings, simply because any change in them degraded the resolution of the image too much and it wasn't acceptable. But by changing the inner ring size to 60%, I probably gained a couple more frames per second, so anything helps. And while this wasn't a significant performance boost for my system, that doesn't necessarily mean that will be the case for all systems. And I think it's important that we all understand how this FFR tool works so we can get the very best out of it. One other important thing to note is that when I fly, I have motion reprojection turned on, and I lock it at 22.5 frames per second because that's just my personal preference, and I find it gives me the absolute smoothest possible performance. However, when I played around with experimenting with these FFR settings, I first did it with motion reprojection completely turned off, so I could see exactly the frame rate I was getting, which was around 45 to 50 FPS, and that was over pretty busy cities such as Las Béziers and even heavy photogrammetry cities such as London. I did also experiment with the different presets that are available in the FFR menu and found them to be a little on the aggressive side, at least for my system. And probably in comparison, my custom settings are close to a quality wide setting with the preset. But I think they can also be handy as they can give you a good benchmark maybe right off the bat as to what different modes will look like, and then if you like from there you can use those and produce your own custom settings just by tweaking the presets a little bit, which is pretty much what I did. I think there'll be a particular use to anyone that has a slightly lower powered system, and they will give a very good indication very quickly of how far you can push your system. So in conclusion, with the FFR settings here, I'd say I've pretty much got them dialed in to as good as I can get them, at least at this current configuration. But one thing to bear in mind, of course, is these toolkit settings need to be used in conjunction with your actual in-game settings and your other PC settings. They're not just a one-stop shop, so you're going to need to have a very fine balance between all of these different settings working in harmony together to get the best possible result. I'll leave a link above and at the end of this video for you to check out my other in-game settings videos if you haven't already seen them. I also adjusted my brightness, contrast and saturation settings a little bit. These are my settings that I'm comfortable with, but I really do feel something like this is really down to personal preference, so this is something you're just going to have to play with yourself to see what is most comfortable for you. But it is especially helpful to be able to play with the brightness, as I sometimes think that the G2 can be a little bright, but again, that's just me. You may feel different. The contrast is a handy thing. You have to be a little careful with that, as it is quite aggressive, so I'm not sure you'd want to go past 50.2, maybe 3 at a stretch. The saturation, I tried both the global and the selective settings. I eventually settled on the global, just out of convenience, I think. But it seemed to do the job and just toned down the overall color a little bit, which I think sometimes can be a little intense. It felt a little bit more realistic. But if you want an even finer degree of control, you can go with the selective option, and then you can individually adjust the red, the green, and the blue. The final setting I'm going to talk about today is the one in the inputs part of the menu, and that is the shaking reduction. Now, some of you may recall in one of my older videos, and it was in the previous version of this toolkit, I tried the shaking reduction and didn't have much luck with it. It just produced some very weird effects on the screen. The whole image would swim, and it was quite nausea-inducing. Now, I'm not sure what caused that. It could have just been a peculiar quirk of my particular system or setup. But anyway, I've tried it again in this latest version of the toolkit, and I'm happy to say that it's not doing that anymore, and it's actually produced some benefit for me. And that benefit really comes from me as a YouTuber recording my footage and moving my head while I'm in VR, and I find that this gives a less shaky, jerky motion when I do move my head in VR, and it comes across a bit better in my videos. So whether it's useful to you, whether you're a YouTuber or not, is something you'll have to decide yourselves. So here are my very first through the lens videos. These were produced using all of my latest settings, including the Openxr Toolkit, as well as all of my other current system settings, which you can find in my other settings video. My aim here is to hopefully show the kind of performance and the smoothness that I'm getting with my settings now. Most of the time, as YouTubers, we'll use some kind of screen recording software such as OBS or NVIDIA Shadowplay, something like that. But the downside with those methods is the recording software itself has an impact on the frame rate. So you kind of lose, obviously, a few frames just trying to record it, and then that doesn't come across quite so well in your final YouTube video. One thing I quickly discovered is producing a through the lens video is not easy. This is pretty much the best I could get after, about a day of experimenting with my camera setup. So you'll have to ignore the blurriness of the image and also the kind of washed out colors and the exposure. It is what it is. It's like if you was trying to record your TV screen, it's not going to look very good. But I think it at least shows the frame rate that I'm getting with the motion reprojection. I think the huge drawback of doing a through the lens video with the Reverb G2 is probably down to the small sweet spot of the lens of the G2. So when trying to focus your camera on that small sweet spot, it's not going to work that well. And that's why anything outside of the absolute center of the image quickly becomes blurry. I think I'd have much better results doing a through the lens video in a headset like the Vario Aero because of its practically edge-to-edge clarity, and that way your camera will be able to focus on the entire lens instead of a minute portion in the center. But in the headset itself, I don't find that it is anywhere near as bad as this. I mean, the sweet spot is obviously not perfect in the G2, we all know that, we've known that for a long time, but it's not bad either, and especially with like the FOV mods and things like that, it's much better. And with the toolkit now to increase the sharpness, it makes the sweet spot feel even bigger. So the center of my vision, the main focus area, is nice and clear, and that's down to the Openxr toolkit itself. I've dialed in the settings now to make sure that area is large enough that I don't notice where it drops off, the resolution drops off on my periphery. I don't see that at all in the headset, but that in itself gives me a very nice performance boost because my PC isn't wasting valuable resources rendering things at the very edges of my vision that I'm really not seeing. And that in turn gives us the kind of performance that you're seeing now. So I hope this video has shed a little bit more light on how we can get the most out of the Openxr toolkit. These settings that I've outlined here are to be used just as a guide only, as of course all of our systems are different and we will all experience varying degrees of performance. One other thing, just as I was finishing up recording this video, there was a pretty big announcement for Vario Aero users. This announcement came today from Chris over at Pie in the Sky Tours, and also Steve, the VR flight sim guy, two really great YouTube channels, all on VR in the sim, and if you haven't checked them out, I highly recommend you do so. But anyway, the big thing is because the Vario Aero supports eye tracking, the Openxr Toolkit development team are going to release support for that in their next software update. So that won't be fixed foveated rendering, that will be eye-tracked foveated rendering, and that is a game changer. It means that Microsoft Flight Simulator in VR will be the first AAA title to support eye-tracked foveated rendering. This is definitely something that could raise the bar for a lot of other VR headset developers to follow, so it's very exciting news. So that's definitely it for today. If you have any questions or comments, please do leave them down below and I'll do my best to answer them. And if you haven't yet subscribed, please do consider it, as this being a new channel and a growing channel, your support really does help. So until the next video, take care and thanks for watching.